Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to make a very basic, simple pasta dough that consists of two ingredients, just flour and water. That's it, right? So the flour we're going to be using today is called Semolina flour, also known as durum wheat. This is the flour that your dry pasta is made from. Pretty simple to find in the grocery store nowadays. I also carry it here at Gio Culinary Studio on our little school store product shelf if anybody's interested. Now, this flour contains lots of flavor, tastes like pasta. It also contains lots of gluten, lots of structure, which gives the pasta a beautiful texture, right? So let's get started. First, we're going to weigh out 16 ounces of flour. And we're going to do that on our scale here. All right, so we have 16 ounces of flour. And then we need half the amount of water, which is pretty simple. So this is a pretty simple recipe. 16 ounces of flour, 8 ounces of water. So how much pasta does that give you? It gives you 1.5 pounds of pasta. Simple as that, right? Now the water, I even weigh out the water, guys. It's very important. These lines on these measuring cups are not completely accurate. If your table's a little unlevel, or if you're holding the measuring cup a little bit tilted, you're not going to get accurate results. Now, you think that doesn't make a whole big difference, but if you're even just a 1/4 ounce off of liquid in this pasta dough, you're going to end up with something too dry, or if you have a 1/4 ounce extra, you're going to end up with something too wet. So you really want to be fairly accurate here. So I'm going to go ahead and add 8 ounces of water to my measuring cup. And I'm using spring water, but you can certainly use your tap water. All right, so I have 8 ounces there. Now, it's helpful if the water is warm. Now, there's no yeast or any leavening in this, but the issue is that especially semolina flour has a hard time initially absorbing liquid. So if you warm up the water just a little bit, it'll allow the flour to absorb the liquid a lot easier. So I'm just going to pop this in the microwave real quick, warm it up. Okay, so I've warmed up the water about 20 seconds in the microwave. If you're using tap water, I still suggest using your cold water, not your hot water out of your tap, unless you have an on-demand hot water system. If you've ever seen the inside of a hot water tank that holds your hot water, it's pretty disgusting. So that's not something you want to be eating. So, all right, guys, the next step is to make a well in the center, just like this. And then we're going to add our warm water. Just like that. Now we're going to start by initially adding just a little bit of flour to the center of that well, a little bit at a time. Now I'm going to get some close-up shots of this, so stand by. All right, guys, here we are. So we're going to start by introducing some flour to the center well a little bit at a time, allowing the flour to do its job very efficiently, and the flour's job at this point is simply to absorb water. We're going to continue doing this for a minute or so until we get the consistency of somewhat of a thick cake batter, and then we're going to get a little bit more aggressive with it and begin folding the flour into the center a bit at a time until we end up with a nice, somewhat homogeneous dough. Now, at first, it might feel a little bit crumbly to you, especially if you've never made this type of pasta dough before, and your instinct is going to want to be to add some extra water. But don't add any extra water, because if you do add any extra water, you're going to end up with a very wet dough on the end. So just keep going, working the dough until it comes together, and then what I like to do is turn it out onto the counter. This way we have a little bit more room, because the next step is to begin kneading it to develop that gluten structure. And that gluten structure, that elasticity, is very important to the end texture of the pasta dough. It's going to give us that beautiful chew that we're looking for when we want to make a beautiful al dente pasta, right? And the kneading procedure is fold the dough over onto itself, push it forward with the palm of your hand, give it a 1/4 turn, repeat that again for about 5 minutes. All right, guys, 5 minutes have passed and we have a beautiful, smooth, silky, elastic dough. When you poke your finger in the center of it, it pops right back out. That lets you know that you developed some nice gluten there, right? So the next step is to wrap it in some plastic wrap. I like to sprinkle it with a little bit of semolina flour. That keeps it from sticking to the plastic wrap later on. And then we're going to allow this to rest for about 15 minutes at the minimum, up to about an hour or so, and that's going to make the dough easier to use later on when we turn it into our pasta shapes, which we'll talk about in a second. All right, guys, our dough is rested 15 minutes or so. Now we're going to make a pasta shape called orecchiette. You need a bench scraper and just a simple dinner knife. If you don't have a bench scraper, you could just simply use a knife. We're going to cut a hunk off, and then we're going to roll it into about a 1/2 inch thick rope. Start in the center, work your hands out to the ends using the same amount of pressure. If it gets too long for your cutting board or for your table, you could just chop it in half or turn it sideways, whatever you need to do to get that elongated. So we're just looking for the thickness here, about a 1/2 inch thick. And then grab your dinner knife, and we're just going to cut about a 1/2 inch piece off. And just watch the motion here real quick. So what I'm doing is I'm holding the knife at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm basically dragging that nugget of pasta towards me, and I'm using my index fingers to make kind of a heart shape. I'm holding some of that dough back so that we actually drag and tear the pasta as we pull it towards us, forming that kind of a cup shape. Now it's going to take you about a 6 of these, or maybe a few more, to really get the hang of it. But keep at it. If you practice a little bit, you'll really get it. And it's a really nice pasta shape. It's very versatile. We'll make a little sauce with it later on. All right, all of our orecchiette are done. I'm going to collect them on a pasta drying rack. You could simply use a cookie cooling rack or even just a cookie sheet sprinkled with semolina flour. That'll work perfectly fine. The next pasta shape we're going to make are called cavatelli, and we're going to use a bench scraper to do this. We're using the same 1/2 inch thick rope with the same 1/2 inch pieces of pasta dough. And this time we're going to hold the bench scraper at a 45-degree angle, and we're going to drag those pasta nuggets towards yourself until you form something that looks very similar to, for lack of a better word, a hot dog bun. And then the key is to put a good amount of pressure down, that way you get these nice thin-walled pieces of pasta dough. Just watch the motion just for a minute, guys. Okay, so this is one method of forming cavatelli. I'm just going to sprinkle the surface with a little bit of semolina flour to keep them from sticking together as I collect them onto my drying rack. Again, you could use a cookie sheet or a cookie cooling rack as well. That'll work perfectly fine. Now I'm going to show you another method of making cavatelli, and we're going to use something called a gnocchi board. And it's just a wood board that has some ridges in it, and it's going to form an impression on the cavatelli, and that impression in theory helps the sauce or the condiment to cling to it better. And for this we're going to use a simple dinner knife. Now you don't necessarily have to have a gnocchi board to do this method. You could use a dinner knife on the cutting board just like we did for the orecchiette. But if you really do want the texture and you don't have a gnocchi board and you don't feel like buying a gnocchi board, you could use anything that has a little bit of texture. I've used a sushi mat before that has the little ridges, and that works perfectly fine. You could also roll it over a fork if you want to, but I find that if you roll it over a fork, you don't get those nice thin walls. It ends up a little bit thick. Now you could cut the nuggets all at once. You don't have to cut one nugget at a time. The issue is, though, if you're not fast enough in forming your pasta shapes, your cavatelli, or you could even do this with orecchiette or your orecchiette, that those nuggets begin to dry out on the surface, and then it makes it a little bit difficult to shape your pasta. They begin to kind of crack. So if you do cut a whole bunch of nuggets all at once, make sure that you keep at least half of them covered with some plastic wrap until you get really, really fast at this. All right, guys, there you have it. Two pasta shapes made from the same dough. The orecchiette benefit from some drying time. They'll hold their shape a lot better if you let them dry a couple of hours, even overnight, on either a cookie sheet sprinkled with semolina flour, or if you have one of those cooling racks, that'll work perfectly fine as well. The dry pasta will also help create that nice starchy water that we love to finish our sauces with. The cavatelli you could actually eat fresh just as they are, but you could also dry them for storage, and these are going to take a little bit longer than the orecchiette because they are thicker. Now once they're dry, if you're not going to eat them all, you could pack them up into a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware, and then let them hang out in your cupboard until you're ready to use them. There's nothing that's going to go bad here. There's no egg, right? All right, guys, so join me for the next video where I'm going to show you how to make some beautiful condiments for these pastas. Thanks for watching.
Cari genitori,